The Last of Us Part 1 does more to harm the franchise than any sequel ever could, and brings to light one of the biggest dangers of video games as a medium, period, remakes. Last of Us Part 1 is only the most recent example of a developer working to actively destroy the franchise, and if something isn't done soon, it will only get worse. It may surprise you that this is what I'm referring to. It's not anything to do with the gameplay, it has nothing to do with what happened in Part 2. It's not even that I hate the change, but it's what the change represents that's the problem. While this may seem like a surface level issue, the dangers it presents to everyone who has ever and will ever play video games, whether they liked this change or not, are staggering. If something isn't done, one day soon we will never be able to play games the same way again. Remakes and remasters have been around since way before video games were even invented. Books, art pieces, plays, and more have been recreated time and time again. It's why we can still see Hamlet in a play even though all the original actors have long since passed. Why we still have the works of Socrates, and why we can still see Portrait of Dr. Gott by Van Gogh even though it has very likely been destroyed. Books decay, paints fade, languages die, and people pass away. If the Louvre burned down today, you would still be able to experience the Mona Lisa via the reproductions that exist. They have a very real reason for existing: preservation. Game remakes are a bit different though, as it's slightly harder to just make a one-to-one copy. We're currently on the PlayStation 5. That means there are 5 systems with libraries of video games that can be played on them from just Sony alone. The Last of Us Part 1 is a remake of a game that existed on the PlayStation 3. It's also not the first time The Last of Us has even been remade on a more powerful console. These remakes are necessary for preservation, because you can't buy a new PlayStation 3 anymore, so just making more copies of the PS3 version of the game doesn't preserve it. So I'm not against remakes in general. Leading up to the release of The Last of Us Part 1, I played the remaster of the game for the PlayStation 4. There's nothing wrong with the remaster of the game either. I think upscaling the graphics and making the game run a bit smoother on a higher end machine are great, actually. One thing I find very interesting is when people get upset that a remake doesn't add enough to the original. Personally, I think a remake doesn't need to add anything to the original. As long as it's not worse than the original, then I think it's a great remake. I didn't mind replaying Mario 64 on my Switch, because most of my N64 controllers don't work as well, and playing on the N64 on a high-resolution TV always looks a little weird. I wouldn't have hated the game if they did their best to make the graphics look a little better than they did though. But at what point do you go from remaking the original to replacing it? People have loved and still love Mario 64, and people who love Mario 64 likely still enjoy playing Super Mario 3D All-Stars, but they don't necessarily love playing Mario Odyssey. Mario Odyssey is a different game than Mario 64, and adding in Cappy or more stars to the 64 would wholly change the game. Why should they do something like that anyways? Nintendo is known to release a new Mario game and a new Zelda game consistently, so there's no benefit to reimagining their old properties. So even if their remakes are seen as low effort, I think they're always perfect remakes. They preserve the original experience. Now, there are remakes that went a lot farther than necessary that I enjoyed playing, like the Spyro Reignited trilogy and Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. But remember, these aren't the same experience as the originals. I'm not here to discuss whether the original experience of these games is something worth preserving or not, just that they have failed to do so. However, in the case at least of Spyro the Reignited trilogy, they made an honest-to-goodness effort to hold on to everything that the original had to offer. In an interview, the developers of the Reignited trilogy talked about not having the source code of the original game and having to completely build all aspects of the game from the ground up. So a one-to-one copy wasn't possible, but making sure to preserve that original feel was imperative. Going as far as including the ability to reuse the original soundtrack if you want. They did everything they could to remake the original experience, but this isn't always the case. I showed this image in the beginning, and the problem with this image is that this change wasn't made to preserve the original experience. It was meant to improve it. While this change seems small, it crosses over the line of preservation. The big issue here is that these two people aren't the same person. Changing how someone looks this drastically changes who they are. Giving a character a scar means something in their life happened to cause them to have a scar. Giving someone dyed hair means they care enough about their appearance to choose to dye it. Is it vanity, or are they trying to hide something? That's part of the dyeing of their hair. Changing someone's physical features changes who they are as a person. Even more than just the person, the feel of the game has now changed because of it, and people are going to notice. This isn't just my opinion either. It's something companies have known for years. They have spent millions of dollars to protect the viewer's feel of an IP. In movies, people play different characters. A character isn't a living, breathing being, so different actors can play those different characters. But companies will spend millions to make sure an actor stays in the same roles for a sequel. Audiences are even so harsh as to dislike it when an actor dies and a new actor has to replace their role. This happened when Dumbledore passed away, and it will likely happen when Disney replaces T'Challa from Black Panther. And even so, the companies will try their hardest to get a reasonable replacement for the characters. In Disney's case, I wouldn't be surprised if they started all the alternate universe stuff with Doctor Strange and Spider-Man just so they can have an alternate universe Michael B. Jordan who can play as Black Panther in the current MCU. If this doesn't sound outlandish to you, that's how much money companies are willing to pay to make sure the feel of a single character remains intact. And it's not even the most egregious of examples. Companies have started using CGI to make sure that dead actors continue in their roles after they've passed. All these lengths are going to preserving the feel of characters in the sequels of these movies. They would never dream of retconning the scenes in the original. If all this money is going into just the sequels, could you even imagine what they would do to preserve the originals? So when developers purposely and intentionally change what characters look like, no matter the reason, they are purposely changing the original piece of art. It would be the same as if Da Vinci went on to repaint the Mona Lisa into a different woman because he didn't like how she looked 10 years after painting it. Or a more real example of an author deciding to drop random facts about their characters in their books years after finishing the series, or a director adding in new CGI scenes to the director's cut of a movie. These examples might seem outlandish and silly when you can just ignore them and consume the original, but you can't just ignore them and play the original when it specifically comes to video games. Games are the hardest media to consume. I'm not talking about difficulty, skill level, enjoyability, or anything like that. I'm talking about what is literally required for you to play a video game. In order to do that, you need to have a game be served to you as a playable package. For physical games, that means you need a disc, cartridge, or something like that. For a virtual game, that means you need an executable. Once you have the playable package, you then need a medium on which to play it. So a console, computer, or phone. Just something that can play it. The console or computer needs specific hardware and software to play this package. That's why I can't put my Dot Hack game into my PS5 and then just have it start up. It's why when you download a game off Steam, you might get another download for some software the game needs to run. This is what I mean by it's the most difficult media to consume. Compare this to a book, where all you need is to be able to read the words, and those words just need to be on something that you can read them off of. Or a painting, where all you need to do is be able to see it. Not only are video games difficult to consume, they're difficult to recreate. If you have an executable on your PC, sure, it's easy enough to copy and save, but if only physical copies exist, you need to rebuild it from the ground up, like with the Reignited trilogy. While books, movies, and paintings aren't completely immune to eradication, a video game has a much easier time being lost to history. MMO games are a prime example of this. It requires servers, usually with many moving pieces, to recreate the experience. While a company can decide to recreate the original experience, many other companies will likely never try once they shut down the original game. Even if they want to, it's hard to pinpoint what the original experience even is. The fact is, games receive patches constantly that add to the game's new dungeons, quests, equipment, and so on. So an MMO is hard to recreate. It's not just MMO games either. Single player games aren't even exempt from these same issues, because as time goes on, games which require a constant online connection to play exist. This is a big deal because it's not just these games need a constant internet connection, it's that the business they created need to maintain a server that allows you to keep playing. Otherwise, every copy of the game will become become unplayable. Luckily, companies that do this are usually called out as absolute slumlords, and these examples are relatively rare. At the very least, while companies may require online connections, and developers like Naughty Dog can try and change their characters, my PlayStation 3 might be relatively old, but I can always play the original Last of Us on it. Maybe I'm being too harsh on Naughty Dog. It is their IP, after all, so they can make whatever changes they want. And maybe glow-ups like Tess and What Happened to Peter Parker are okay. I mean, the originals will always be around, right? Wrong. PlayStation 5 seems new now, but there will be a day when the last PlayStation 5 in existence stops working. Electronic parts become obsolete. Software gets lost. Integrity of hardware degrades. There will be a time when you will never be able to play a real N64 again. But Nintendo's dedication to preserving the original is steadfast. The fact that Naughty Dog and Insomniac are willing to pervert their games is terrifying. Do you think Naughty Dog will ever re-release the remaster for the PS6? No, it's going to release The Last of Us Part 1 remaster. And who knows, at that time, Ellie might become a boy. And if not the PS6 version, why not the PS10 version? If you don't think stuff like this will happen, or perhaps PC games are immune to this, it's already happening and they aren't. When Dark Souls was re-released, Dark Souls Prepare to Die Edition on Steam became completely unavailable. Deus Ex Human Revolution, the director's cut, is the only version you can currently obtain, and it removed the gold filter from the game, and there's no way to add it back without mods. When a company can force you to pay for a newer version, they will. Older systems are becoming more difficult to play, and virtual storefronts are less reliable than physical games. There are already examples where they have removed games forever, or have completely shut down, making it impossible to even purchase games at all from them. Adding these facts in with a more and more willing population of developers to make drastic changes to their IP under the guise of a remake, what you get is a recipe for the eventual complete eradication of past video games playability by their developers. And we haven't even talked about the worst part yet, either. You don't own your games anymore. Companies' terms of service are becoming more and more about letting you lease their product instead of you outright owning it, and games are no exception. I said this earlier, but there exist single-player games that will literally stop working if the developer decides to shut down their servers. That doesn't mean that you only lose the game if the company goes out of business. Companies can decide to make a patch that destroys your ability to play a game. There have been several cases of this. The most notable is the PT demo. The worst part about this is that they believe they even own the player's ideas of the game. What I mean is that while a creator owns whatever they create, they don't own the idea of it. No matter what J.K. Rowling says about her characters, she can't change the book I own to reflect those changes, so I can ignore them if I want to. If the creator of Minecraft went off to make a game where Steve was a bigot, that wouldn't inherently make Steve in Minecraft any different for the millions of players who played the game. However, if creators can go in and patch their games so that they are in fact the way they want, then they are actively trying to own our ideas as opposed to just owning the IP itself. This may sound like an okay thing, but the reality is Naughty Dog isn't the same developer that created The Last of Us. While yes, they are technically the same company, many of the people who made decisions for that game are gone. Even the people who are there now aren't the same people they were when they made the game. They have changed, and they have no right changing the game they made to reflect themselves now. They can do whatever they want to the franchise in the sequel regardless of what anyone else thinks, and they definitely have. They have no right to change the original, though. If you think they do, then take a minute to imagine the worst person you can think of. Say they bought Naughty Dog, and they now own that IP. They have just as much of a right to make any changes they want to The Last of Us, the original. And in my opinion, they have no right at all to make those changes. And neither does Naughty Dog. As time goes on, the problems become more and more commonplace. Developers are remaking their old games, but instead of staying faithful to their original property, they are recreating it in their own current perfect images. These new remakes will slowly replace the original until they are no longer obtainable. In the grand scheme of humanity, video games are just a blip on the map right now. However, humanity will exist for a long time to come. But if developers of games continue to remake their games into the ground, changing everything they don't like about it, it's only a matter of time before the original developers pass away, and the remakes 100 years down the line, when the last PS5 has long since stopped working, are going to be even less faithful than what we have today. There will never be a Mona Lisa of gaming. There will never be a game remembered as long as Romeo and Juliet has been. Our great-great-grandchildren might still be able to hear Beethoven's Symphony No. 9, but they might never know the pain of losing Aerith. Games as we know them will never be able to be played the same way again. So, is that it? Is all hope lost? No. There is still hope on the horizon. First, not all developers are as crooked as Insomniac, Rockstar, and Naughty Dog. Toys for Bob, who understood that preserving the original was paramount. Also, while the new Halo Master Chief Collection was crap on release, it had made sure to try and preserve the feel of the original, giving the game the ability to switch between the original graphics and the new one. Many developers opt to do something similar to this. They may seem lazy and unimagined, but that laziness might be our key to a bright future. As I said previously, we know that Nintendo has a dedication to making sure everyone has access to the original. Usually, they even go as far as to have the same glitches as the original games do. There's an even brighter and more secure future for us, though, and that's thanks to the brave men and women who choose to be pirates. As long as they exist, our favorite games may not be lost to time. While buying games virtually means nothing if the developer can delete the game right off of your machine, pirated software will always be a viable solution for future generations. There exists software that can replicate the N64, Sega Genesis, even the PlayStation 5. Like an abusive parent, developers will try and control their children to do exactly what they want, even years later. But as long as pirates reign, their children are safe. And I'm here to tell you it's even better than that. It's all completely legal. That's right. First, the software you need to run the game is called an emulator, and it's not illegal to own or create. So you can own an N64, PlayStation, Sega, and yes, even a PS5 on your computer, completely legally. Developers want them to be illegal, but fuck them, they're not. ROMs are slightly different. While ROMs are legal, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise, distribution of ROMs can be seen as illegal because of copyright laws. A publisher can make a case that because a website that distributes ROMs exists, it's affecting the sales of their exact same game, and that infringes on their copyright. So you do have cases of Nintendo taking down websites that housed ROMs of their games. This doesn't make owning those ROMs illegal. In fact, there is no law in the United States prohibiting the use of ROMs, and no case of legal action that has ever been brought against someone who used ROMs. I can say this with impunity that I own ROMs. I play ROMs. I also play and purchase new games whenever they come out, but you can't trust developers to hold up their end of the unspoken agreement. As time goes on, it's all of our responsibility to hold on to the games we care about and protect the art that has affected us so deeply, because developers have been shown time and time again that they have no intention of protecting their games. If you think I'm exaggerating, I want you to think about your favorite moment from a video game. I think we all have one. What has to change in order for that scene to no longer hold its meaning? Is it the main character? A side character? Is it what was said? Is it who said it? No matter what your favorite moment from a game is, it will be preserved in its original state as a ROM, no matter how distorted the remake gets. Thank you for watching my video. Please like it if you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.